So about 2 months ago, I decided I was going to go on a hunt for a new distortion sound for my studio, something that I haven't had in any of the amps I have today, just something unique and different. And what I came across was this MXR Distortion Plus pedal, which has been used by some pretty famous artists like Randy Rhoads from Ozzy Osbourne and others. And I just thought I'd give it a try. So I liked it. I liked it a lot. There's a little bit of interestingness with the pots, which I'll get into later. And then I was like, yeah, this is great. And then I found out that MXR makes a whole bunch of different distortion pedals. Basically, I've got 4 of these MXR distortion pedals. And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. That's a lot. That's a lot of different types of pedals from one company. But it wasn't badassery enough. And so, well, turns out MXR makes a 78 distortion custom badass pedal. So I figured, well, might as well pick this up too, because I wanted my collection to be badass. And if it wasn't badass enough, MXR does make a super badass distortion pedal. Super badass.
I am the ultimate badass.
Yeah. So why am I doing this? I'm not trying to flex my pedal collection here. I actually wasn't really committed to doing this until I found that no one on the internet has done this yet, which is to compare all 6 of these distortion pedals. All right, so what I'm going to do here, we're not going to do any sort of A/B testing, but what I am going to do is I'm going to go through all 6 pedals with the output set to relatively the same amount of decibels, so it's not louder or softer or quieter than the other pedal. To my ears. We'll tune it to my ears. And then also, we'll have the tone cranked up and the distortion cranked up. Some of them don't have tone. For example, this Distortion Plus just has distortion. Well, we'll crank that up. And we'll do that with all of them. And then when it comes to the super badass, we're going to take all 3 of these pots, bass, mid, and treble, crank them all the way up, and then crank the distortion up. And also, on the 78 badass, there's this crunch button with this blindingly blue light that comes out of it. But anyways, we're gonna leave the crunch on for this one because I figure that's the feature they're trying to promote with this pedal. That's different than the other 4 pedals with 3 dials. So we'll give that a try. We'll put the crunch on and we'll just crank distortion and tone. The other thing that's going to be different in this one is we're actually going to put this on some sort of meter so we can look at the frequency responses, the differences between the frequencies on all of these. Because I've already tried them out. I'll tell you really quickly that the distortion sound is the same. It's the same distortion sound, the same clipping, however you want to describe it, that you get from pedal to pedal. What is different is how the tone changes. And there's a couple other things we'll talk about in the recap, but that's basically going to be the approach that we're going to use for comparing all 6 of these pedals. The microphone we're going to be using for this show is the Royer R121 ribbon microphone. Normally I hook these up with a pair of this and a 57 paired up, so I'd have 4 channels, but just for this we're only going to use the one Royer, which does an excellent job of capturing guitars. And so that's our mic, and we'll be micing up to that cabinet right back there. I'm going to spend about 2 minutes doing this. All right, so here's the deal. I'm in the same room with the amp, so sometimes this doesn't work. I got a noise gate on me, it keeps popping on and off. All right, whatever. The amp is right freaking there, and the pedals are right here. Ooh, that's kind of cool. I'm on 2 cameras at the same time. Wow. All right. As you can see, all 6 pedals are lined up, ready to go. Does everyone want to hear what a Fender sounds like without any kind of like effects and stuff? Isn't that sweet? Seriously though. That's it. All right, let's do this. MXR Distortion Plus. Go. All right, let's try the MXR Distortion 3. MXR, what it was? Classic Distortion. Classic. Sorry about that artificial harmonic. Okay. Prime Distortion. MXR Prime Distortion. Okay, at this point, I'd pretty much heard enough of that one and needed to move on to the next one. Okay. MXR Badass. MXR 78 Distortion Super Badass Custom. With the crunch button turned on, you can see there's like a blue button right. You can see the blue button. All right, so what I wanted to do now is I just want to kind of give a perspective on some of these pedals and what I've heard so far in doing this bake-off or test of 6 pedals. They definitely all have the same distortion sound, the MXR distortion sound, however you want to characterize it, whether it's clipping or an op-amp sound or however you want to get nerdy on the sound. It definitely has the same distortion sound. It's not a fuzz. It's definitely some sort of distortion that is very classic MXR. And then there's just like some very significant differences in the ranges of the frequencies, and that's why the analyzer's out here. There's definitely some differences in the frequencies between all these amps. My camera's starting to do stupid shit again. All right, so what I want to do is kind of point some of them out. So like we're going to kind of hop around a little bit here on some of these. And I want you to pay attention up above. Hey, that worked. Up above. Oh, my arm, where'd it go? Up above as the frequencies between 3 kilohertz and 5. That's going to be to the right of where that sine wave, whatever you want to call it, is. Alright, so that's just with nothing on it. There's no gain or anything on it. It's just my Fender guitar and the amp. I want you to see how between 3 and 5 kilohertz there's differences. And you can actually hear it, but you can see it in the analyzer, right? So let's just really quickly do the Distortion Plus again. I'm going to freeze that for a second, and I want you to see between 3 and 5 kilohertz before it starts to drop off. There's what I would call a shelf, right? A little bit of a shelf, and that's just the baseline sound with no tone, changes. I'm not doing any type of special EQing, but that is definitely the baseline sound. In my mind, that's the baseline sound, okay? So let's go take a listen to another pedal. We'll do the Distortion 3 because in my experience, I got that next. And so I wanted to compare the two. So let's do the Distortion 3 and look at its sine wave, or wave. Sorry about that. Had both pedals on. All right, so here we go. Now, if you notice, this one, to me, sounds a little bit more muted in the high end, and you can clearly see there's a steep drop-off between 3 kilohertz and 5 kilohertz. So, yeah, what I'm hearing, I'm not going totally deaf at this point in my age, but what I'm hearing is definitely a more muted in the high end on this pedal. Now, I want to go step up to one that is just really high end, really tinny, if you will, and that's the Classic Distortion. I was wrong. That's the prime. It's the Prime Distortion, right? All right, so here we go. Prime Distortion. I'll turn the analyzer back on. All right, so you see that there's a bump, but the bump goes a little bit further into the 4 kilohertz before it starts to do a steep drop-off. I find this to be one of the tinniest or high-end responding pedals of this group, and it's just because there's like no bottom end, there's no gut to it, there's no punch. It's just really, really high end. And I guess if I'm working on a solo that's got to pop through a bunch of different mid-range frequencies in a mix, maybe this is the pedal for me. I don't know. If I'm going to pop into a solo and do something, it could be it. And again, I'm not being very fair in saying I didn't play around with the tone and move it all the way down. I am trying to find the maximum value. I'm cranking the pots up, except for the volume or the output. And so this one, to me, in this test, sounded very tinny. Now, which one's my favorite? Let's get back to that in a minute, okay? Let's compare the badasses, shall we? All right, there can only be one badass. But I'm going to compare the two badasses, or the there goes the camera again. The badasses, the badassery. Remember, we covered this. It's a word I'm making up. It's badassery. Okay, let's start with the silver one, the super badass. I'm hearing a lot of noise. A lot of noise coming through, and I'm not even doing a thing. I've got the volume on my guitar down all the way. And if I bring it up, you can hear it. But if I bring it back down, like, there is a lot of noise going on. Fairly certain I get a good ground here. Most of the other pedals are very quiet. Some of them are absolutely silent. This one is actually, ironically, the only new pedal in the entire lineup. Everything else is used. This was off the shelf at a big box retailer that shall remain nameless. All right, let's look at the meter on this one real quick. Badass number 1, which is the super badass. See, all right, this one does roll off quite a bit. It does push out a little bit into the 4K range, but it does drop off quite rapidly, if you will. And when I compare the two badass pedals, this one seems to have a less high-end sound to it. See that? Wow. Okay. See, and I turn on the other one, the 78 Distortion, the other badass, and it must be just like the custom thing they did to this one, because it's called Custom Badass. Maybe they got rid of the fucking noise. All right. So here it is. Hold on, I gotta turn my meter back on. Took me a couple tries there to get the freeze button, but on this one, the bump up in the 4K range is much higher. But I just find it, everything else, the arc from 2K all the way to 5K and down, just seems to be a lot more inviting. Something I could probably listen to a lot longer than the other pedals. So yeah, so I definitely, between the two badasses, the 78 badass is my favorite badass.
There can be only one.
Let's put this puppy to bed. I want to preface this next part by just stating that we ran an experiment where people might not do this, right? You might not have the distortion cranked up all the way. You might not have the tone cranked up all the way. But this was our baseline test for all of these, right? And I'm going to give you the breakdown of how I feel and think about each of these pedals, all right? So here we go. In order of me purchasing them, I don't know. Who knows? Okay, MXR Distortion Plus. It's not going anywhere. It's in my bag of tricks when I need a really good distortion. Is it flexible? Probably not, since it doesn't have tone, but can I EQ it in post? Yeah, absolutely. Also, it's freaking heavy. It's heavy compared to the rest of the pedals, except for the Distortion 3, which we'll talk about in a second. It's heavy. It's really like thick steel. So if I did ever put it on stage, it could probably take a really good beating, but I love this pedal. It doesn't really have any really high end or low end. It's not tunable or, you know, changeable in terms of EQ, but I like it. It's great. Here we are, the Distortion 3, the MXR Distortion 3. All right, there we go. Zoom it in a little bit. Compared to its predecessor, maybe, I don't know. There wasn't a Distortion 2, so I assume this is the next one in the series. It's a little bit flatter on the high end. But again, I have not played with the tone buttons at all to get it to do anything differently. This one's a keeper for me. I'm going to keep it in my stockpile of MXR pedals. And, you know, I like it. So it's something I probably could tame. You know, who knows? I might be recording a guitar amp that's really loud or tinny. I only use the Fender, so maybe this is going to be a different experience. I also didn't use the neck pickups. I used the bridge pickup, which is a humbucker, which gives it a different sound. But I like it. This is another pedal that I really enjoy. It's a little bit, like I said, a little less on the high end. Classic Distortion almost sounded similar to the Distortion 3. I think these two were very similar. If you've got one or the other, I think you've got pretty much the same pedal. Again, I have not played around with the tone to see the variations between the two, but if you could pick up either one, I think they sound relatively the same. And I'm sure the designers on MXR are like, no, dude, you are totally wrong. But that's my perspective on this, right? Prime Distortion. This is one I'll probably won't use as much, right? I don't know. I might find a use for it. I might also play with the tone just to see if I can, on the low end, get something better on the tone. But when I cranked it, it did the job. It punched through. It was really high. But I'm wondering if I just played around with the low end a little bit more in comparison to the other pedals, would it sound better? It's not going anywhere either. In fact, none of these pedals are going anywhere. I am a pedal hoarder. So, but it probably will get used a little bit less unless I decide, hey, you know what? I know I need to punch through some really cloudy mixes, right? So let's put this in the mix. And then the last two we'll talk about here are the badass ones. Now, this one was super noisy. You heard it earlier. You heard it was super noisy, and I think it might be because I was just cranking all of these pots, right? The treble, the mid, the bass. I'm gonna take care of playing with those later. It just got super noisy, and maybe even just bringing the distortion down a little bit will tame that noise. But it's very flexible. There's a lot of different things I can do with this compared to the other pedals. This one, even though it was noisiest, it had a lot of options and a lot of variations. So again, a specific use case for recording something, but I will have to figure out later on how to kind of get some of that noise rolled off in the future. And then lastly, I keep murdering this name, the Custom Badass. the custom badass, which my theory is the custom is it got rid of the noise, but 78 distortion. I don't know what band we're going after in the 70s or 78 specifically, but I really like this pedal. I like, even with the crunch button that makes you go blind, if you look directly at it, don't look directly at it. It'll be a spot in your eye for the rest of the day, like looking at the sun. But I really like this pedal. I like the responsiveness of it. Even cranked up, I wasn't having an ear bleed problem with the tone. Again, classic distortion sound from MXR, which all these pedals still continue to have this amazing type of distortion or sound that I enjoyed. And the crunch wasn't offensive enough for me to want to turn it off. And I think the crunch they were trying to model after like a 90s grunge-ish type thing. In the manual, I think they were going after 3 different distinct sounds from 3 different decades, and in the crunch 90s grunge thing, they were trying to compete with the crunch. And if you can get any closer to see, will it focus on crunch? No, it won't, but it's that button right there. It's amazing and blinding at the same time. If you came to me and said, AJ, you can only have 1 pedal, I'd say, can I have 2? And then you'd be like, or whoever they are that would say that, okay, what are the 2? But we really only want you to have 1. And I'll say, okay, but I'm going to have 2, right? These are the 2. The Classic Distortion Plus and Velcro. I'm kidding. Jesus. And the custom badass 78 distortion pedal. These 2 are the ones that I would go to if you said we're playing a show tomorrow, and I'd be like, but I'm like ridiculously out of shape and I suck on stage. But if you say we're gonna play a show, I'm like, I'm taking these with me. They'll be on my pedal board. So there you have it. This is my opinion. It is not funded by anybody at MXR. I'm sure the lawyers at MXR are coming my way at some point for saying something negative. I don't know. I love their products. I've got a couple of them. I had the Power Brick on the board. I've had a Micro Ramp Plus for a long time. I love that. And we could talk about it in a future episode. But that's it. Those are my 2 top choices for the 6 MXR distortion pedals that we reviewed. And I hope we break the internet with the number of likes and subscribes with this. So thank you very much for watching. Love y'all. Take care.